mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic.
Hey everybody, welcome back to One Mic, where I watch shit so you don't have to. And today I'm here to talk about episode 4 of the FX Limited series, Under the Banner of Heaven, entitled Church and State. I thought this was a great episode and a very apt title for this episode because it does showcase the battle between church and state that takes place. We see this as the Laffertys kind of move toward the more fundamentalist style of Mormonism that includes like polygamy and blood atonement and all that kind of stuff, which is obviously in direct opposition with Jeb's kind of like more traditional kind of views. This episode, I think, does a great job of showing how once you reach the point that Dan is at throughout most of this episode, where you're like starting to fully embrace this more extreme view of thinking, how they manipulate people into joining their own way of thinking. And I think we see that a lot in several instances, which I'm going to talk about throughout the course of this video, where this happens in this episode. And I found it to be incredibly compelling because it makes me think not just about the fact that this takes place, but just how this really impacts this community and how these people's behavior can shift when they think that their religion is under attack, even if it's not their specific style of religion. Because I don't think everybody in this community shares Dan's extreme views, but they still, I guess, like inadvertently kind of come to his defense against Jeb in this episode. And it's interesting to see them kind of like come together to protect the perception of the religion rather than, and placing more importance on that rather than placing the importance on figuring out this crime, why it was committed, and who did it. So really great stuff in this episode. But I'm going to go over this episode, and I'm going to spend most of my time talking about Ron and Dan because I think that's where most of this episode kind of lives. But this one picks up right where the last one left off, with Jeb and Bill headed to this guy, Bishop Lowe's house, to make sure he's okay because I think it was Robin. No, it wasn't Robin. It was Sam, who mentioned that he could be on this list, the blood atonement list, the same one that Brenda and her daughter Erica might have been on. And they arrived there. It's very clear that there's been some sort of intrusion. Everything's all strewn about. The house has been ransacked. No one's there. There's no signs of foul play. There's no bodies or anything like that. They can't find Bishop Lowe or his family. But Jeb does find a folder on the Laffertys that contains a letter from Diana. More about that letter later, as it is a very big focus of this episode. But we later find out that the Lafferty brothers did go to this house at some point. A couple of kids talked with Jeb, and they let him know that, they were riding their bikes or whatever, and they saw a green Impala parked in their driveway, which does not belong to the Lowes. And there was like two like weird, quiet guys in the back with long hair. And we find out that that is actually Ron's car. And we got to figure that also that by this point, these brothers were probably fully entrenched in this lifestyle, and they probably all look like how we saw Sam look. I can't wait to see present day Ron and Dan, and I'm also very concerned about the wives as well. But I'm not going to dig too much into that. But just if you watch this episode, you can understand why I'd be concerned about the wives, especially as I go over what took place in the episode. But essentially, the letter from Diana is to Bishop Lowe asking for help and guidance as it pertains to Dan and the Lafferty brothers, kind of, like I said, their move toward anti-tax, anti-government, all that kind of stuff, which they feel is just kind of like flying directly in the face of what they believe to be good and true. And everybody kind of knows that Diana didn't really write this, that Brenda really kind of wrote it, and that Diana is just kind of being used as the pawn to kind of deliver this letter, because I'm sure Brenda already knows she's not in the best place within this family to be writing that kind of stuff. But it's probably better if Diana does it. But let's see, where was I? Also, there's this young rookie cop who doesn't seem to know what he's doing. He asks for all kinds of what should I do now, that most cops would know to do naturally, but he does somehow figure out that I think he traced Bishop Lowe's credit card or something like that, and he found out that this guy went to a store and bought fishing supplies, and he's going to go fishing at a place called Granddaddy Mountain, which is, wow, that's a name. That is a name. And the cop does find him there, albeit under suspicious circumstances, but I'll talk about that a little bit more later as well. But his radio doesn't work where he's at, and the guy who led him to this river where Bishop Lowe was at just seemed kind of suspicious. So I don't know. I have a bad feeling about what's going to happen with this cop. But Ron, so I'm going to move into kind of like the Ron-focused portion of this video. Ron tries to get a loan to buy more property, and he goes to this guy at this bank, and the guy's like, we can't really give you this loan because of all the shit that Dan is up to, all this anti-tax, anti-government shit. It's a bad look. And then you got Diana over here, your wife, sending this letter talking about, all this kind of shit. Like, this guy shouldn't even have this letter. Well, no, I think he said that he got it and then gave it to Bishop Lowe. But either way, because of this, Ron gets pissed off and leaves. And the guy at the bank, what was his name? I think I have it written down. Bascom, I think was his name. He tells Jeb that Ron was not upset with Diana, but was upset with Dan. We'll come back to that. We later see Dan smoking and kissing this random chick. The dad comes up and snaps on him. Robin tells us that Dan took this chastising to heart and started reading up on like more traditional older Mormon scripture and found out that a lot of the older stuff had been kind of stripped away. And he looked at this as like the government's attack on his religion. Like they're taking away all of this shit. And all this stuff they've taken away, that they have taken away, is my understanding things that Mormonism has turned its back on. Things like polygamy and the blood atonement and that kind of stuff. Like, okay, that was all right in the 1800s, but like, we can't really do that right now. But I like this point of the episode because this is the start of showing how much Dan bends the rules to work in his favor under the guise of religious purposes, and also how he does that to manipulate people. But I also wonder too, like I can't really gauge this, and I think this is a good aspect of the acting, is that I don't really know for sure that Dan is consciously using these fundamentalist views and these anti-tax, all of this shit to serve his own personal purposes. I think he's clearly doing that, but I don't know if that's the sole reason, and he's using it, using all the religious stuff as an excuse to serve himself, or if he really does believe this shit, and then it also so happens to help him as well. But I think that lack of clarity, that ambiguity around Dan's motivations, I think is really interesting. I lean toward him just entirely being manipulative, but we'll see. So he takes Robin to visit these fundamentalist Mormons out, and I think it was called Colorado City or something like that. They got guns out already. Like, they don't fuck with nobody there. Like, they don't want anybody there who's not part of their crew. But Dan kind of presses them. Like, he kind of sucks up to them almost, going like, yeah, man, it's too bad. It's too bad we can't do polygamy no more, man. You got it nice. Like really sucks up to them on polygamy shit. And then the one guy recommends that he read this work by Joseph Smith called The Peacemaker. But I like this conversation because it does give some insight into this extremist style of thinking. I'm going to read some of what this guy says directly, because I wrote it down directly as quotes from the episode, because I think this is interesting stuff to talk about. But this guy says that he doesn't think that they being these fundamentalist Mormons, they don't think themselves better than the original text, and they refuse to like alter their beliefs with the times. Like just because times have changed doesn't mean that our beliefs are wrong. And Dan asks what happens if the cops come around, and this guy says, if man's laws conflict with heaven's, then the faithful will be arranged under the banner of heaven against them. Obviously, that's the title of the show, but essentially they operate on the idea that they're serving a holier power than the law. But do they really believe that, or is it just justification to do shitty stuff? Like, oh yeah, either way, they sound like they're taking the moral high road, which is interesting when you're saying like, I'm doing this because I am not going to turn my back on my original religious teachings. So now bring in all the 13-year-olds so I can marry them. Like no. Like, I just think that's such an interesting insight into how they think. Like, how convenient that there is a text within this religion that allows you to marry as many women as you want, regardless of their age, which is something that's shunned upon in our society today. So they might look at it like, I really wish I could marry a 13-year-old, but society looks down on that. But hey, what do you know? Here's some old Mormon text that says it's perfectly fine. And I just love the manipulation of religion to serve. I've mentioned it several times, but like, this episode showcases how much these people manipulate this text and manipulate this religion to serve their own purposes. And it's wild to me the extent that these people have gone to do terrible things under the banner of heaven. But like under the guise of being religious, and under, as they thump their Bible, like, hey, here's why I'm out here marrying multiple 13-year-olds. Like, there's so much to say in this episode by the writers and by the writer of the book that this is based on. So like I said, really great stuff in this episode. And another great scene, Jeb receives a file on an arrest for Dan, and we flash back to Dan now trying to sell Matilda on this whole polygamy idea. She's like, I don't know about that. And he's like, listen, if I want to get into heaven and you want to respect and you are going to pay me proper respect as the man of the house, I got to have at least 3 wives. Let's just pause here for a minute. As a individual of sound mind, what sense does it make? Like, what is the correlation between number of wives and the purity of soul that will allow you into heaven? Like, God sitting up there like, he ain't got enough women, dog. I don't know if I can have, like God is like looking at you like you supposed to be a player. Like, oh, he ain't got no hoes, man. I don't know if he can come up here. Like, that's so ludicrous. And he's like, yeah, Joseph Smith had 33. Like, he had a Larry Bird jersey number worth of wives. Like, it's wild to me how he's trying to sell. And again, this doesn't feel like trying to sell Matilda on polygamy from a religious standpoint. It sounds like trying to sell Matilda on being able to fuck other women and using this antiquated text as the justification to do so. And you look at, like, we still do this today in this country. Like, look at how in 2022 we make political decisions based upon text that was written in the 1700s. Like, as if they had understood everything that could possibly ever happen, and the laws and guidelines that were created back in by the forefathers are just unassailable. Like, they're just perfect for the rest of time. And no matter how much society or culture changes, we need to rely on this old ass text no matter what. That is a ludicrous concept, and it's explained, it's exhibited in this episode as well. The idea of like, oh yeah, I gotta get into heaven, so I mean, you gotta let me have some more wives. It's what this old ass book says. Like, it's ridiculous, but like, I love the fact that this episode gives these kinds of talking points and can create these sorts of discussions. Despite if anybody might pop up, like, I've noticed like people have popped up in the comments, and I'm going to reply to you guys at one point, talk, like, educating me about Mormonism. And I appreciate that, by the way. So hopefully none of you look at me like, this motherfucker is wild right now. But after Matilda rejects him, he starts speeding angrily. He gets pulled over. He thinks it's a conspiracy because he's running for sheriff. He leads them into a car chase, and he ends up arrested. The brothers then later visit Dan in jail, and Ron is not here for this polygamy shit until Dan says, you're really the head of the household, not me. You should be like, and Ron bought it so easily that I sat there and questioned whether or not he was being authentic. Like, is he actually buying this? Because he wants that approval so badly. Like, we saw how upset he looked when his father chose Dan to run the show while he was gone, and gave Ron like no job and didn't even talk to him. So like, the idea that Ron could be the head of the household, like, that means a lot to him, even if he pretends it doesn't. And it shows in this scene, because he was very much opposed to everything that Dan was saying up until Dan said, you know what, maybe, I think it is you that should be in charge. And he's like, oh, okay. So let me see, where was I? So this was like, this jail scene was kind of like the start of the manipulation of Ron. And then it later kind of culminates in this conversation that takes place in their, I believe it's their basement, where it looks like they're having like a homegrown church session. And Ron again is pushing back on a lot of what Dan is saying. And Dan says something to the effect of like, did I write down the actual quote? If I can read it directly. No, I didn't write down the actual quote, but it was essentially Dan asking Ron if following these unholy laws is affecting his profits. And I think Ron looked at that as like, how does he know that I'm about to lose everything, that everything's not working out for me, that everything's not peachy keen? And I think that, coupled with being told that he should be the head of the household, his own doubts about whether or not he can manage to take care of his family on his own outside of, when I say his family, I mean like his wife and kids outside of the rest of the Laffertys. And I think this was kind of like his breaking moment where he was pulled into the fold. And it's revealed that that moment took place before Diana sent that letter. So the perception at the first time we see the letter is that Diana sent the letter of like about Dan and about, not Alan, but about Dan and Robin and Sam and whatever, because Ron wasn't messing with them. But now we find out from Robin that letter was sent long after the prison moment, and that the letter was essentially just as much about Ron as it was about Dan, and that he was like fully in the fold prior to her writing that letter. And there's another great flashback scene here as it pertains to the polygamy stuff, where we see Joseph Smith. I'm still at a good time. Where we see Joseph Smith selling his wife on polygamy as well, and he's coming at it from the like, God told me I need more hoes, like and she's like, okay, you mean to tell me that God is telling you to marry more women when the reality is that like you just are bored of me and you want to have other women. And he says a great line. Did I write it down? Yes, I did. Well, I didn't write it down. I typed it. But yeah, I just love the fact that she says that he's using God to speak through him because he wants other women because he's bored of them. It's like the same thing I've been saying this whole time. Like this manipulation of the religion to meet one's own needs. And then he goes, you accuse me of falsifying revelations to suit my own desires? I want to be like, yes, that's what I've been writing in my notes for this entire episode. Like, that is what you all are doing, is using the religion to meet your own desires. And I love how he just put it in that line. Like I literally shouted at my TV, yes, that is exactly what I'm saying. But yeah, then he goes kind of like, he starts pretending like, and it's not a pretend like I'm doing it mockingly. He does it seriously, but he's kind of just like, God is telling me that if you won't let me have more hoes, you need to be destroyed. He's like, and she's like, you mean to tell me God just told you that I'm going to get destroyed if I don't let you marry, if I don't let you marry multiple wives? But I mean, that's what ended up happening. Apparently, according to Dan, he ended up with 32 more wives. So I don't know if that was in exchange for the first one, but still interesting just how that idea continues to pop up in this episode. Yeah, but it's intriguing how great of a job this episode does in showcasing that, which is why I like it so much. I also like how they kind of like use the idea of like, well, God is speaking through me, so if you don't listen to me, then that means you're not listening to God. Like, they all do that. Joseph Smith does it. Dan does it. It's very interesting to watch them manipulate. So Jeb is actually threatened in a similar manner. The idea of like, if you're not listening to God, you listen to me. This Ballard guy that comes up there, who Robin calls with his one phone call to get him out. He's they call him the stake president or something like that. I'm the stake president. I love steak. He's the stake president. And this guy asked for the brothers to be released into his care, and Jeb refuses. And at that point, this guy's demeanor changes a great deal. And he like religiously threatens him. Like, I don't remember what exactly he said, but like the music, his face, his tone, it was very much like a fuck with the church, we gonna fuck you up kind of messaging. And that's what I took from that. Ballard also knew about the conversation that Jeb had with his bishop after the baptism, which again speaks to almost like a conspiracy to protect the church from outsiders who might discover all the fucked up things they do. Because Jeb's like, having this serious conversation with this bishop, like, I'm having doubts about this. I'm dealing with this case. They're talking about blood atonement. And the bishop was like, yeah, just don't worry about that kind of stuff. I don't worry about it. But then he turns around and he obviously went and was like, he probably picked up the phone right when Jeb left. Hey, Ballard, Jeb Pyrie was in here talking about all kinds of shit about blood atonement and yada, yada, yada. Like, the idea that they all will band together to protect each other while they are doing shitty things. Like, it's incredible. It's incredible. And then when Jeb arrives at church after this press conference at the end of the episode, everyone at the church is giving him funny looks. And this one woman, I think he called her Sister Doreen, she does the same thing. Like, she kind of issues like a thinly veiled threat that seems more threatening when you play scary music to it, but it's kind of the same idea. And she says something like your kids are at the age of atonement and they need to be baptized. And I didn't take too much from the baptism part of that, but from the atonement shit, I made a note of that. But anyway, back to this, well, not back to this press conference. Let's talk about this press conference that got everybody pissed off at Jeb. At the end of the episode, the chief finally returns, the chief that they've kind of alluded to existing. He finally returns, and he too would rather mask the reality of the situation to essentially cover for the religion. He doesn't want to bring any negative attention to the religion through this case, so he indirectly tells Jeb like not to make a connection between fundamentalists and Muslims, Mormons, and themselves because the press can't distinguish the two, right? And he goes out there. They all have this press conference, and the press kind of badgers Jeb about do you think that fundamentalist Mormons could be involved in this? And then Jeb's like, yeah. Again, while the chief is sitting there like, don't say it. And Jeb's like, yeah, I think so. And so against his chief's wishes, against the wishes of probably everyone in that town, and even his wife looked upset by it, Jeb points that out. And now we've reached a point where Jeb's less concerned with the religion and how it'll be perceived, and he's more concerned with the reality and solving this case. And now he's seeing this religion for what it really is. He's been faithful for a good minute, and as soon as he begins to ask questions, people turn on him and start threatening him. And all that's gonna do, if you're somebody who truly is gonna grapple with the morality of it all that's gonna do is push you farther away, because you're looking at it like, all I did was ask questions and I'm getting threatened. So like, what am I to take from that? So I don't know. I just think it's been an incredible episode to kind of mull over this idea, this idea of protecting the perception of the religion in favor of like prioritizing that over the reality and solving this gruesome murder and figuring out who was behind it. They have a conversation where they mentioned Diana's parents said that they hadn't talked to her forever, and that the dad says she joined a cult. Yeah, I mean, that's what it sounds like. So, I loved this episode. I love how it made me think. I love how it made me see that the idea of using old text that's highly regarded but antiquated, that doesn't fit into the current day, using that to serve your own purposes it's not unique to anywhere. Like I said, we see it in politics today, and then we see it in this television show with these Mormons. And I think it's interesting to think that idea can persist throughout all different aspects of life, all different walks of life, that people selfishly, in order to get what they want, and like I said, that's what's being done in politics. Like, to get what you want in 2022, you're gonna cite some old ass text from the 18th century. Like, that idea persisting throughout all different avenues of life is so interesting to me, that people are that selfish that they will use outdated text and documents or whatever to support their own selfish desires. And I think that's what I took away from this episode the most. I think that's probably what we're meant to take away from this show in general. But I'm going to wrap this one up. This was a great episode. I don't know. I might have said some stuff that pissed some people off. I don't know. But I mean, it's all jokes. But at the same time, like, I do think this episode had a lot to say about that dynamic. Regardless of whether or not you agree about it, that's what the fuck they're talking about in this episode. And that's what they want us to think about. So until next week, peace.